Hello, good morning and good afternoon. I'm David Willis, and you joining us for our Willis and Friends event, the first of the calendar year of 2020. And thanks for joining us today. As you know, our Early Relational Health Coordinating Center at CSSP seeks to elevate and communicate about innovations, scientifically based and impactful approaches that advance relational health with careful attention to racial justice, anti-racism, and health equity. All of that is so critical as this paradigm shift to supporting relationships for future child health and development and community building is upon us. I'm really fortunate that I have these sessions to share with you my valued colleagues, national thought leaders, and friends who inspire me and embrace this framework of early relational health, equity, and putting it into actions. So let me describe today the context of our conversation. In July of 21, last summer, PolicyLink, in partnership with Wellbeing Trust, conducted an equity project that resulted in a report that was entitled Advancing the Wellbeing by Transcending the Barriers of Whiteness. That work was led by Michael Mcafee at PolicyLink and Tyler Norris at Wellbeing Trust, who are our discussants today. They released their report with a webinar that summarized their thinking and created such a rich dialogue, I wanted to bring it all to you. This study articulated that centering whiteness is a social and institutional framework that prevents meaningful movement towards racial equity, social justice, and certainly future well-being, and thereby requires new narratives for a disruptive and transformational approach in both systemic and policy change. These new narratives will be essential to drive an anti-racist systemic and policy changes that will be required to move far beyond this centering whiteness of our society, and certainly is key to advancing future generation health and well-being. And I think we see the challenge in this very moment as the Biden administration struggles to move this work forward in its aspirational Build Back Better agenda. There's so much happening, so much to do that is right in front of us. You know, the well-being of the next generation of our children and our nation will depend on it. And all of this will require a focus on the power of human connection, the importance of relationships for human development, and health and well-being, and the protection by strong relationships and communities against stresses and adversities. So their release of their report and then the webinar that was included inspired me, and I wanted to bring their thinking about upstream promotion, well-being, preventive mental health, and early relational health in systems and communities. So that's what our discussion is going to be today. And it's entitled, again, as the paper was, Transcending the Barriers of Whiteness for the Next Generation's Well-Being. So I'm really honored to have two visionary leaders with me today, Michael Mcafee and Tyler Norris. But let me tell you about each of them. Michael Mcafee, I first met when I was at HRSA. Michael, I think you and I met when we were both presenting at a home visiting event. And we shared after, I went right up to you and we had a nice conversation about, and then further conversation over time about place-based work, upstream prevention work, deep in communities, partnering with families and communities. Well, Michael is the president and CEO of PolicyLink. Since 2018, he followed the legendary founder, Angela Glover Blackwell, because he had demonstrated his results-driven leadership, knowledge, and passion, and is now from the inaugural director, and he led Promised Neighborhoods and the Institute or Polished Neighborhoods at PolicyLink. His devotion to serving the nation's underserved populations made him that obvious choice. During his time at PolicyLink, he's played leadership roles in securing Promised Neighborhoods as a permanent federal program, led efforts to improve outcomes for over 300,000 children, and has facilitated investments of billions of dollars in neighborhoods of concentrated poverty. Before joining PolicyLink, Michael served as Senior Community Planning and Development Representative at Chicago Regional Office of HUD. Before that, he worked in Community Foundation in Kansas City. He served in the United States Army and became a Dean's Distinguished Visiting Fellow at Graduate School of Education at Harvard. So I'm delighted, Michael, that you're with us. And then Tyler, I met Tyler, you and I met Tyler at the National Academy of Sciences around the Forum on Children's Wellbeing. And I remember our first conversation sitting across the table with a little glass of wine, talking about lofty thoughts and opportunities. And your reflective ability, your visioning always inspired me, especially this allies on the journey of well-being and really thinking about that was in front of us, so the challenges of families. So Tyler Norris is the Chief Executive Officer at Wellbeing Trust, an impact philanthropy with a mission to advance mental, social, and spiritual health of our nation. Over the past 3 decades, Tyler helped shape health and development initiatives in hundreds of communities in the U.S. and around the world. And I learned just recently that he participated in the World Economic Forum at Davos. I was a little envious, but he was not able to go to Davos just this past period because of the pandemic. He's a long-standing social entrepreneur and a trusted advisor to philanthropies, health systems, government agencies, and partners. He's serves on the board as the board chair of Naropa University, a board member of Mindful Philanthropy, and an advisor to City Health, Enterprise Community Partners, and Humanistic Care. Has many other leadership roles, notable with Kaiser Permanente. And he's a graduate of Harvard Graduate School of Executive Program, earned a master's in divinity from Naropa University and a bachelor's degree in world political economy from Colorado College. But most of all, I'm honored that you're with me and delighted that we can have this conversation. And so to get us started, I'd like to give each of you a chance to give me some opening reflections on your work together in 2021 on that equity project that resulted in the report. How did that come to be? What were some of the important key insights? What was revealed to you about this this journey? And so, Michael, can I come to you first? Welcome.
Yes. Thank you, David. Tyler, it's good to be with you. And to all who are joining, it's a pleasure to share space with you. For me, this report had its origin in my frustration that too many times I was trying to talk about policy and advance policy. And I kept running into this barrier, and that barrier was people's discomfort with the issue. And the more I thought about it, it was that they were discomfort with disrupting this construct of whiteness. The reality is that's what this nation was founded on. It was founded on a construct where one group would have dominance over other groups. And we don't have to label people or judge people in that process. All we need to do is own it. And in thinking about the construct of whiteness, it also helped me think about the construct of masculinity, my own, and what do I center generally? And so what we were trying to think about is, can we put a name to it, something that is constantly getting in the way of us getting the results we want in the world? And then can we trouble the question of how to move beyond it? And in moving beyond it means I have to move beyond the comfort of the folks that I'm used to talking to about this issue. Thus, why it was so important to work with Tyler, who brought this powerful frame of well-being to the work.
That's phenomenal. And Tyler, can I come to you? Your opening thoughts.
Sure. And again, thanks for having us, Michael. Just always such a blessing to be in dialogue with you. I love where you started and kind of thinking about my own experience working in hundreds of communities. We've always talked about an equity agenda. How do we make sure we're doing things that benefit Black and Brown and Indigenous communities? And for the most part, we've failed. And as I look at the work I've done, even some of it I'm very proud of across the country and so many partners, we have not been successful in measurably improving the health and well-being of Black and Brown and Indigenous and immigrant people in this country. So I have to start with the fact that as a person who's dedicated his life to this, we may have bright spots out there, but it's not happening for our communities of color. So we need to ask why. Now, I was thinking about this question and kind of three tributaries. I was blessed to know Angela Glover Blackwell for 3 decades. Not every conversation with her has been easy in a mentorship type relationship over the year because she's challenged me mightily. And she, along with you, Michael, were with us when about 200 of us gathered in Oakland for a well-being summit. It was kind of gathering the healthy, sustainable, livable whole communities movement to say, how do we measurably improve health for all? In the country. What does it mean to create the vital conditions for well-being? right, over here. And this all became the foundation for Thriving Together with the Centers for Disease Control and others. And we were having a dialogue. I know it was July 20th, 2018, because of my 59th birthday. We actually spoke with the mayor later on this evening. But we're going, yes, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Yes, justice, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. We need to do deeper work. But, we hadn't hit COVID yet, where we would discover soon after that we'd have 4 times the rates of conditions leading to illness and death for Black people in the country, 10 times for Native American. But the question kept coming, and Angela and you were challenging us, all this is good, but what are we doing that will be different than what we have done in the past? Because all the good work in the past has not actually changed the disparity elements at all. And in fact, we've seen backtracking and Black wealth and so many other issues. That's a key tributary I want to put on the table. David, another one's with you. We've been in this National Academy of Science, Education, and Medicine Children Wellbeing Forum, which you so ably co-chair. And, as the CEO of a mental health philanthropy, trying to look at reducing deaths from alcohol, opioids, and suicide. And, we've been saying, well, we need to get the care right. Check. We need to create affordable ways to access that care, to turn that around. But what is it about communities that would create mental health and well-being in the first place, right? So it kind of brought us back to things that we talk about, and I hope will be part of this dialogue, like how do we get the first 1,000 days of life right? And what does that mean, particularly for Black families, T-minus 9 months all the way forward? Let's come back to that one about what we might do in that space, life trajectory and service. And I have to say, when Michael and Victor Rubin and their team started bringing this together, and we started saying, what is this context? That now we look at, essentially 30 states sort of looking at, with policies in place that will make it harder for Black and brown and other people to even vote. We have to look at what are the structural elements that are reflected in our mind, reflected in our values, and so much a part of the drinking water, that either consciously we are excluding Black and brown people, or unconsciously we are complicit. And just coming out of Martin Luther King Day and weekend, we are all well aware of what it means to be asleep and complicit by doing nothing. And this just put us on a path with Michael, Policy Link and Wellbeing Trust, saying this has to be a very different conversation, not only between those of us working in the field, but the dialogues that we're engaging out across the country.
That's incredible, Tyler. And you're exactly right. I think of generational building, the next generation, and the loss of potential so early as a result of structural racism and all the disparities and all the challenges on communities and neighborhoods. Michael, you and I touched on that around promised neighborhoods. But for Michael, what did you see? What were some important insights that you and Tyler coming together, especially relevant to the moment, came through? What of your time together and studying with this project, what are 1 or 2 key insights that you think are really critical in the moment?
The first starts with the first sentence of the Equity Manifesto. It says it begins by joining. Mm-hmm. And if we're going to achieve the results that we want to in the world, we've got to get in different relationships, still hold dear the ones that we are in, but we've got to expand beyond that comfort. And so joining with Tyler and the Wellbeing Trusts is us practicing what the Equity Manifesto says since we wrote it, to begin by joining and continue to join with different networks and forming different relationships. If you want the results in the world, we've got to get to a scale of alignment that rivals what we currently have. And then there's a word in the Equity Manifesto, grace. While we all may think we're right, it doesn't matter if you can't move the world. And this is one of those frustrating realities for me. One of my mentors said to me in my 20s, she says, Michael, the cross you're going to have to bear is that you get things quickly. But what's the point if you can't help people become better?
Right.
If you can't help them get it. And so having the grace, even when I'm angry at what's being done to me and my community and other communities, to continue to find ways to reach out, to continue to find ways to be on a journey together of learning and discovery, that grace is really important. Because if I stop seeing someone's humanity, I'm no better than the racist. Even though I don't see their humanity for a different reason, the result is still the same. And that's a hard pill to swallow when people are still harming your community. And so the last thing I will say is this. The hardest conclusion for me is that I will not get a chance to heal.
Yeah.
I've got to continue to join. I've got to continue to hold the grace in a moment where folks, the very folks who will say, don't make it about race, Tyler just signaled to you, they are the ones who continue to use race as a way of causing harm. And then they tell me, don't scream, don't yell, don't protest, don't talk about it. They put me in a straitjacket. And I have to get up every single day holding that burden and figure out how to do this work. And so that frustration of having to join, having to hold grace, and the fact that I will never fully get a chance to heal, and the fact that I got to stay effective in this work, that's a hell of a combination to hold. And the last thing I'll say is this, but the reality is our ancestors built us for this moment. And so while it is a pain in the butt at times to have to hold that all, the gift is that we are capable of doing so. And when we do it in the right ways, we're able to produce something as beautiful as the document in the subsequent conversations that we've had.
Wow.
Tyler, what would you add to that?
I first, Michael, I'm so struck by you thinking and speaking about grace, and a couple of things occur to me before I go to my own points. One is just the nature of grace, as when grace on us is unearned and unearnable. And that when we look at the grace in our own lives, it's not a performance principle. It's a grace by virtue of. But then there's other grace and permission. Right? Let's just talk about what's different. Let's say I get upset, Michael, in a meeting. I'm going to get more grace than you or a Black woman, right? We know what happens when a Black person gets angry in a setting. I'm going to let's just say that I will be given more grace in that moment, whether I apologize, whatever happens. Because so there's even whiteness is centered in who gets to be angry and how. Just to build on your point, just to go really specific, David, to your great questions. One of the things that I thought was we learned so much in the paper, and again, this shouldn't be so novel to most of us, particularly given what we have experienced of the deaths of Black people by police and so many other, is just the reality of the police response to a mental health crisis, right? We're in the mental health field. We're all involved right now in helping drive 988 as an alternative to 911, but you could have a different call line. The question is, what's the response, right? I mean, my household, kids growing up, 911, I'm comfortable calling. Michael, I don't know about you. Are you going to be comfortable calling 911 to your household? That right there is demonstrating the realities of whiteness. So the first piece that we learned so much about before, it's been going on forever, but that the country started talking more about starting a couple of years later is the police response to mental health crisis. How mass incarceration and whiteness has been based into mass incarceration that wildly disproportionately has Black and other communities of color incarcerated. And not to mention sentencing and the things that get them sentenced, the predatory lending and ability to get capital, right? Michael and I could walk in with the same portfolio and I'm going to do better with my loan based on data. And Michael, you and Angela wrote an incredible article in the New York Times sometime not so long ago about that. Not to mention access to care, access to income, and others. So I think what we really started looking at was the very real impact on Black and brown and indigenous well-being rooted in constructs that systemically have resulted in Black and brown people doing less well economically, et cetera. And so then when we look at health data and go, well, disparities and we try and fix it by access to health, no wonder we've been unsuccessful, because we haven't addressed the fundamentals. And again, back to whiteness, and we'll kind of keep unpacking this. What holds all those things I just said in place? Yeah. Right here, right? It's how we are, particularly I'm aiming at the bald white guy, right? It's how I'm thinking, how I'm feeling, what my values are. And when I look at those systems, how am I thinking about everyone, not just those who might look more like me?
So what was the experience of you complementing and working together on this project? And more importantly, what's been the reception of both your joint message as well as the movement that you generated by this report? Where has it taken you, and what did you learn from each other? How did you complement each other, and what did that bring to this journey of change?
Well, for me, the first thing is nothing's never right until it can stand the intellectual rigor of different points of view.
That's beautiful.
Right. And what I appreciated about Tyler is, most people who really didn't know me that well, and I would try to bring something like this, they would have juxtaposed the issue with the interest of their institution versus, is this the right issue for the moment? And we probably wouldn't have been in a conversation about doing any work together. Right. But he could hear the signal from somebody who looks very different than him that this is an important issue. He could acknowledge that we got some concerns and we got to figure this out, but let's get on the journey and try to do that. First, that's all you can expect from someone, right? And so I thought that was really beautiful. The second is, I didn't have to diminish who I was to join in the conversation, which is another important point. I don't want to do that anymore, right? But it also doesn't mean that I'm absolutely right about the issue and what I'm seeing. And so we could actually get in a relationship where we could then struggle through the issue. What does it mean for our institutions? How do we begin to frame it up for the nation in a way that they'll hear it, while also not dimming the strength of a leader of color wanting to say something new about the issue? And so that process was really exciting to be in, where we were engaging as individuals holding very different interests, very different tensions in our own organizations, and finding a path forward. And the reason why it was so important for me, and it's the last thing I'll say on it, is this. As the nation becomes a nation of color, there is no guarantee that we'll get a better outcome. If the nation becomes a nation of color, there is no guarantee that we'll get a different outcome unless we bring a different consciousness. Because we all have been infected in some way with the vestiges of this nation and its sinful founding. And so for me, I'm trying to own my contribution to trying to show up with a different consciousness. And I'm still struggling with it and trying to figure it out. But I know if I don't try to do this work, the nation doesn't have a chance. So while it may have been easier for me to critique the constructs of whiteness, there's a more formidable storm on the horizon. And that storm is, will leaders of color have the consciousness to govern and build a nation for the all? Because that's still the unfinished work. And so for me, beginning to write this paper and struggle through these issues of whiteness and even beyond whiteness, what else needs to be questioned when we center it, were exciting things to discover as we went through this. But the ability to show up authentically was the best gift that I got out of it.
That's phenomenal. We'll come back to that sense of what's the future look like? How do we think about future? How do we think generationally? But Tyler, I want to come to you with the same sense of what was your experience of working with Michael, and what were the ahas, and your backgrounds are quite different. Your lived experiences are different. Your leadership experiences are different. And yet you came together around this project, and you commented, Michael, there were some struggles. Maybe Tyler, you might want to touch that too, if you wish.
Well, first, and Michael, I'm not sure I knew this until the webinar last July, but Michael comes from Mississippi, and I come from Idaho. Let's just
Yeah.
start
Hold on
off.
to that.
Me growing up in rural cowboy Idaho is a teenager in the 70s, right?
Yeah.
And what was going on in the 60s and 70s, et cetera. So just one is just to imagine a little life difference. This may be a little off track. I'll come back to the question, but one of my experiences as a teenager in Idaho was not being a choir boy. And this kid got in trouble. And I experienced at age 14 diversion from law enforcement from my infractions. Me and my buddies did some property damage, right? The real deal. We were struggling and took that out. Well, I'll never forget the day that the principal of the school and the police chief and the judge came together in a community meeting. It had to have been the worst, squirmiest hour of my life. Was front row with my folks in our little rural community. And there they are. Any kids, and the principal said, any kids that would do this to this community, I'm waiting to say, gonna get sent to St. Anthony, the reform school, right? We're waiting for this, me and my buddy David. Any kids that would do this to this community need this community. And they worked out a restitution reality, which took us 3 years of summers and all that to pay back the damage we have done, and a reconciliation process, almost a redemptive process, the end of which resulted in my record being expunged. And I went off to work for a United States Senator within a year, going to college. Now, let's just look at what happens to a black or brown kid that does thousands of dollars of property damage and all, this kind of thing, and what that fits. So I just want to even start with the reality of my own life being shaped so differently by being a white kid in a white community where they're like, these kids are struggling and they need some help. And we did, and we needed the love and wraparound. But is that how we respond in this society to others who look different than me, who are struggling no different than we were, maybe different causalities and context, but the same basic thing? So I just want to bring that up because that's part of my lived experience of the privilege of being a white kid, is that in my community, we were viewed with the possibility of actually having some healing, not kids to be thrown away. So I just want to build on a couple of things here. When Wellbeing Trust was founded, it is by the Providence Health System, at the combination of the Providence St. Joseph Health System. I'll remember Dr. Rada Hochman, our board chair, CEO of Providence, and the Sisters of Providence and St. Joseph, who's hold the sponsorship and, the 170-year-old organization that they and their foundresses, really started. Is that one of the very first thing they said is that we want you to change deaths. We want you to reduce rates of deaths of alcohol, opioids, and suicide, and increase equitable well-being and deal with addiction. But we want you to have an agenda for the most vulnerable among us. We expect to see an equity agenda from you, a social justice agenda from you. So from the very beginning, we've been challenged by what does that look like? Then something was more than some good work. And I think, Michael, pivoting back, and then I'll close my element here, that this exploration with you has allowed us to be somewhat fearless, kind. Mm-hmm. You said it the other day. It was really a soul level relationship of really trying to understand each other in these worlds that would allow me, in my role and our team and Wellbeing Trust and our partners, to think about doing something fundamentally differently, not just incremental improvements on some equity strategy, right? No matter how good it is, because that isn't just going to get us there. And so I love this idea of dialogos, learning together, thinking together, and exploring together, like the quality of what we've and our teams have gotten to have. Mm-hmm. What, seeding, maybe David, some questions to come. What would happen in the country were we to start having conversations of this nature? I'll plant that and come back to it, David, if that's
We'll come back to it, but I want to lean in on, Michael, your comment about, as leadership and more, the leadership in this nation becomes more of color. And as the next generation is now, children of color, more than 50% of children now born are of color. That's our future. We're moving into what we hope is a multicultural nation. And how do we think about the generational changing opportunities to really working locally in communities or in neighborhoods or with people? Because so much of a family experience is local and the supports around them are often local. And leadership increasingly, I think, will be focused in terms of local supports and opportunity. Yet racism, of course, plays out deeply in all these communities. But how do we try to capture the resiliency, the hopes, the possibilities, the resiliency nature that does exist with people together that help shape what the future will become? I'm wondering how you're, from all the good work you've done with Promised Neighborhoods, all of the current kind of moment, how are you thinking about that as you think about the future of a multicultural community nation?
Well, when I think about it, I'm clear about one thing. Everything we're talking about is the design elements of a nation.
Yeah.
And if we don't tend to those, you can't keep asking nonprofits to deliver results for you. They can't.
Right.
We have a multiracial democracy, and we've never built a legal and regulatory framework, a set of customs, or even institutions that were designed to deliver on the promise of that multiracial democracy. We built a democracy for wealthy white men, right, particularly, right, and don't need to even belabor that. The reality is every generation gets a chance to perfect this democracy. Right. And this is why I'm owning my own sensitivities to perfecting it, because while whiteness may not be my issue, masculinity sure is. Mm-hmm. Being able to fully step into equity issues still is. PolicyLink doesn't have it perfectly, mm-hmm, right. And so for me, the exciting point is if everyone can just let go of being so darn sensitive that we still have work to do and not offended because someone's telling you you got work to do, right, you can actually design and build what's needed for a multiracial democracy. And I have my own reality of this. I'm sure just as white people have some feelings when people are talking about white folks, I feel the same when people are talking about males and masculinity and toxic masculinity. I've had my own questions around, well, why are you coming down so hard on us? What does this mean for us? What am I losing? And then I had to really get still and be like, why am I gnashing my teeth about something if I'm not culpable in it? Mm-hmm. Right? Really, where are these feelings coming from if I don't own some contribution? Mm-hmm. And the real question for me is, if I can't sit in that storm, if I can't sit in that discomfort, I really don't deserve to be in this seat. I really don't deserve, because that's what the seats we get the privilege of occupying is all about right now. The discomfort of navigating that we are all unfinished works. Yeah. My mother used to sing a song all the time. Used to say, please be patient with me. God is not through with me yet. Mm. Right? And he goes on and on and on. But that's us. That's our institutions. And that's our nation. And so that is the real opportunity here as we become a multiracial democracy, is how do we actually build for that and design for it? It doesn't just happen because the demographics change. The founders of the nation were deliberate about what they built, good and bad. And we should be as deliberate about standing on what we can stand on from that foundation and building something better that allows us to realize the promise of equity and belonging. And so that's the work for our generation. And that's what I'm excited about. And if I hold that mental model, I have no right then really to beat up white folks when I got my own work to do. So we all can humbly join, because every last one of us has something that we're centering within ourselves that no longer serves us well. We're all have something that we're centering that no longer serves us well. And if we can figure that out, we can take a few more steps forward towards progress.
I'm certainly seeing people listening to one another in neighborhoods and communities that are really trying to organize around, again, next generational thinking, but also building the mindset and the hearts and the allyships and the respect for one another at every level of community. And it's as a developmentalist, as a pediatrician, I think that really has a lot to do with early foundational work, experiences and the like, and the networks of certain relationships around young children, next generation, which are so critical to develop well-being. Tyler, can I come to you? How do you think about multiracial democracy and about generational well-being, the development of the next generation?
Well, one thing about our multiracial democracy is we have an extraordinary opportunity because there are not many great examples globally around this. I mean, this is an extraordinary moment. And Michael, I think I love what you sort of just challenged. We can be as deliberate as those founding fathers and mothers, we being a very different group. And I'll just remind myself and all of us, we're 6 years short of our 250th birthday as a country. Right? This is a powerful time to be thinking about a quarter of a millennia into this nation, a couple hundred plus years. Most civilizations, you look at history, don't make it past 200 or 300 years. You can look at all the great civilizations of the past. I just won't go through them and name them, but the Egyptians to the Assyrians to the Roman Empire, the British Empire, they fall on their own accord, right? And this is the basis for which this our nation, I believe, is most vulnerable. You ask me about Homeland Security. There's plenty of global security issues to address. This is a Homeland Security issue because our well-being as a nation, our efficacy as a nation has everything to do with how well we navigate who we are as a multiracial nation, multiracial democracy. And if our economic life, our social life, our civic life, our democracy produces disparities and systemically excludes, we can't have a nation when in fact over half the kids born today are Black and brown, and we're going to be a majority non-white country. I don't know what people kind of think about old days or something like that, but just you can dispense with your fantasy here. We are very quickly becoming a different country. So the question is, how do we be that in a way that is dignifying of all human beings and is good for all? Because I think the whole point, maybe Michael will come back to curb cut a minute, lower income, just to go to it bluntly, lower income white people do better in an equity centric strategy, right? Just to be quite clear about this. So I also, Michael, so appreciated what you said about sitting in discomfort as a CEO and a board chair and other things, just like you in your roles. I get a lot of opportunities to sit uncomfortable because I don't always know what the right answer is, or, we're struggling, and there may be some wisdom with age, but there's more humility of the difficulty of some of these issues. As a trained chaplain, I'm geared to listen for that discomfort, knowing that there's something underneath. And when I look at my own discomfort, for example, being challenged on an issue of not seeing my white-centeredness, or Michael, thank you, where we share not seeing ways that I am toxic. I have a queer partner, and Kate is very clear with me with her queer and trans community. What an incredible opportunity for me to learn and look at my I don't want to just say blind spots, blindness, of not getting it really. And so I have a choice there. Do I go, oh my God, all this part, like get over it? Or am I actually willing to listen and learn? And I think that humility, that vulnerability, that willingness to learn when challenged is the mark of what leadership is going to look like, not just at the top, leadership for all of us. And how can we learn to sit with our discomfort and frankly do the work about our arrogance that makes us so darn prickly in these conversations to start with? Like Michael, if we could, as men, what makes us prickly in a gender conversation? Well, I think I'm being a good guy, but or in a conversation about a straight guy, in a more queer trans community, we have a real opportunity to learn. That is, for me, my growth edge. I'm 62. I'm like, I want to grow. Most of the growth here doesn't have to do with my next job. It has to do with how I am showing up and how I am working with the places that allow me to sit with discomfort and wonder, why am I so darn uncomfortable to start with? Well, it's because I'm holding on to something that, frankly, I might not even want to be holding on anymore and doesn't serve me.
That's right.
You both have the opportunity to sit at really interesting tables and be in interesting positions. And what are you seeing that inspires you? And then what are you seeing also that you think are impactful for families and communities in the next generation? I mean, what excites you as you think this is a rough moment in time? I get that. It's, we're changing eras. The whole infrastructure of the way we think about human nature and being multicultural, as you say, one of the first nations probably in the world that's going to really tackle moving forward in this way. I mean, it's not worked out and we have a lot to learn, but, hope springs eternal with the next generation. Relationships get built very, very quickly for the next generation and the way they experience themselves. But what are you seeing from where you sit, from what you hear, from where you have influence that inspires you? I mean, how do you get up in every day and think about tomorrow and the work you do that has impacts for, families, next generation, and the future people? 20 years from now will be, our babies will be citizens voting. I mean, how do you think about that kind of work and that kind of space?
Well, I think while there is a lot of tension in the nation that is real, I could tell you so many beautiful stories of white folks who are transforming themselves, have transformed their organizations in real quantitative ways. I mean, and rapidly. And so in this very tense moment, I see a very different thing. I see those hopes and aspirations that people had for folks wanting to come to equity in real ways. I see it happening in mass. And I'm excited about that. And I think that's why you see this tension right now, because you see these visions for the future of this nation colliding.
Yeah.
And so I see that happening. The thing that causes me so much concern still, while I see that happening, and I see leaders of color showing up with a new voice and a humility to want to figure out paths forward without sacrificing who they are, we're still stuck in a charity orientation from our nonprofit upbringing.
Interesting.
We're not owning the design of the nation. And until we get that right, we're going to realize we can't get the results we want. We just put more than $6 trillion in the marketplace. And somehow it's magically missed the more than nearly 100 million folks living at 200% of poverty. How do you put $6 trillion out there and miss the mark? Yet the $1 trillion that Trump put out did miss the mark in terms of my tax bracket. It was laser focused and spot on. Opportunity zones. Oops, we missed the communities. PPP. Oops, missed the communities. You see, that's the design treatment. That's just not a mistake. The voting issues right now is a design treatment. It's just not a mistake.
Right.
And so what I'm trying to tend to, if you want the results for the nation that we want to have, it's not, yes, we need nonprofits, but we got to be clear what's the work of charity and what's the work of liberation. And this is what I mean when I say it's time for us to transform our laws, our regulations, our customs, and our institutions. And John Gardner called us to understand this. This is the work of self-renewal. And so to me, I'm concerned that too many people still think that a charity strategy is going to overcome all of these design elements. You can have all the place-based strategies you want today. They will fail until your institutions stop holding a hostile disposition towards poor people.
Right.
Right? You can't have your health department, your state health department, haggling whether they're going to give someone $300 in a pandemic and then think the nonprofit sector is going to fix that.
Right.
That's criminal.
Right.
I mean, think about Florida celebrating that people can't access supports. That's a design challenge as well. That was a system that was designed to work exactly as it is.
Yeah.
And so what I want folks to do is to take this next leap. We know we can do programs and services really good, and we know we can provide immediate human relief, and that is always needed. And now we can hold that, and we can now tend to the work of asking the question, what do our governing institutions need to be for a multiracial democracy, and how must they change? I mean, you think about it, you can go through all the federal agencies, their programs were mostly designed in the 70s. They're not even current for the current state of complexity that we have. And so this is what I mean when I say we're holding on to things that will never achieve the results that we want. So this notion of simply spending billions of dollars and fantasizing that the world will be different is just that, it's folly.
Yeah.
So I want us to begin to think about charity. I want us to think about liberation. And I ultimately want us to think about the redesigning of our house for what we currently have the opportunity to create. A thriving, multiracial democracy where everybody belongs.
Mm-hmm. Phenomenal. Tyler, how do you want to add in?
Well, I love it. David, one thing you and I share is that we've been in the healthcare sector much of our lives,
Right.
and we are steeped in the quality movement, right? How do you improve the quality of care? And
Right.
the founders of this movement, like Edwards Deming and Duran and others, remind us, to Michael's excellent point, that every system is perfectly designed to produce the results it gets.
Right.
So exactly, just Michael, just a big double down on that. We are getting exactly what we want, and we look at the outcomes and who gets left behind. And so this is a design issue from the beginning. You asked him about some bright spots. Michael, you're talking about so many stories, experiences. I have the same thing too, of sort of befriending, thinking differently, new configurations, new membership, disproportionately saying, not just, I'm going to bring some folks on the board, but how do I want to change the conversation on a board, et cetera, or in a group, or whether that's a men's group or a civic organization, trying to think differently. I'm inspired by looking out across the country. I'll just pick on one, Oklahoma City, for example, of just civic partnerships where business, government, nonprofit, the faith community, people without titles after their name sitting alongside the fancy people in the community are coming together to say, how do we create better outcomes for our town, Oklahoma City or Duluth or wherever you might live, Oakland, Michael, where you and I share geography, which is saying we actually have to address these issues as the rate limiting factor to producing outcomes of improved health and well-being, reduced cost, education outcomes, business outcomes. This is key. So I am heartened by when I see our democracy in that multi-sector place begin to work. Now we have work to do to translate those dialogues into policy and practice and investment, to Michael's point, but I'm sharpened by that. I'm fascinated by a conversation that, and here comes the polarizing point, right? Alert. Defund the police. Well, the dialogue, there's a big dialogue to be had there, but let's look at the dialogue that's happening right now about 988, which I mentioned before, as an alternative response. And not just, we're going to have a different phone number and the dispatcher is going to be less about dispatching SWAT trained officers and more about a harm reduction approach. But how do you build out a system that makes sure that those who are mistreated or outside those are really powerful discussions happening out across the country and in states. I think that the dialogues that we have been in about the first 1,000 days of life, being part of a faith-based health system and in this sector, I know that the dialogue right now about how do we make sure that every single child and her mother, their little support system, have everything they need to be successful in those first 1,000 days.
Yep.
Not just out of charity. We're going to backfill when people start falling apart, right? To Michael's earlier point. but as a system design to make sure that every kid and their little support set have everything they need to be successful. And we don't stop there at the first 1,000 days. We do like the Casey Foundation, others have helped you lead, making sure that grade level reading and off to a great start. Or, you know, in communities like our own, Michael, where just so many young kids don't finish high school, what are those pathways to potentiation?
Yeah.
Whether that's through service. I was looking at the great program in our backyard, Michael, on EMT training of Black men. I just so blown away by this. You know, they were using, I mean, I may be stretching it a little bit, but they were building on the trauma experience of young Black men's ability to deal with nasty stuff going down, and tempered by fire, those kids being able to show up in a difficult crisis emergency situation and hold their cool and focus as EMTs with that badge and training on their shoulder, being able to do like tempered by fire. That's an asset. That's a skill. You've had it rough. You know what it looks like and all that. That's a skill to be built in an experience like that. So I'm really heartened by this. But I want to come back to the point of liberation as a person of faith. I am interested in liberation. And my faith tradition, I happen to be a Christian. My faith tradition says, love one another as ourself. Not like ourself, not like so that you get the same thing as me, but literally as me. So my own liberation, just as Dr. King and others said, is so woven into yours and into Black and brown and indigenous and immigrant and LGBTQ community, that there is no way for me to ultimately do well, or my nice, beautiful white children to do well, if their brothers and sisters in neighborhood around them. So I know my own liberation is in this. And I want to make sure, back to the first 1,000 days, that we make sure that every child born in this country has the opportunity to reach their God-given potential. That's the liberation that we're going for, and our democracy ought to serve that.
I'm glad you said that, because, you know, again, all the work we're doing around advancing relational health, and all the work from the pediatric standpoint, from the child health standpoint, you know, it sees the opportunities of strong relational supports around next generation. And we see in many communities where the power of informal systems support next generation. And there's a lot of opportunity there as the dialogue of a multiracial democracy tries to find its way forward. Some of that plays out locally. Some of that plays out, of course, deeply politically. But at the local level, neighborhood and community and people are talking deeply. There's more and more conversation together. Multiracial conversations, more listening, more honoring, more respecting the how do we create the conditions that would allow for next generational growth and development, because we know the drivers that disrupt all that kind of process. But we're in a constant struggle for finding that path forward. I'm really thankful that you two are putting in each of your roles and in the places you sit together, focusing on this emergence and this critical emergence at the highest level of leadership and also vision, and the sense of a multiracial democracy breakthrough. How does that happen? And how does it play out for every family today that are pregnant or have a new baby coming forth into this world? Because we know the relational experiences and the experiences around them, the context, matter to their future well-being, as well as their mindset. The mindset gets absorbed very quickly as to being connected or not. And that being connected means listening deeply to others and having empathy and having a soul of caring. And this culture, unfortunately, has too many disruptions to that sense of being connected. And yet, communities of color and all that they've been through understand the criticalness of connectedness that we need to hold on to and continue to elevate. So we've got a few more minutes here, and I'm thinking about what are you going to do together next? How are you going to keep this dialogue, your influence, this multiracial democracy movement, this sense of transcending the barriers of whiteness? What are you going to do tomorrow or the next 6 months, next year, in this moment in time? What excites you to keep this energy discovery moving forward? Tyler, you first?
Sure. First off, I still love this dialogue. Let's keep it going. A moment ago, Michael, talking about democracy made me think about Gandhi when he was asked, what do you think of Western civilization? He said, I think it'd be a good idea. So back to our democracy. What's a democracy worth preserving for the next 250 years? And what could be that light on the hill, if you will, like really a light on the hill that shines a light on everybody's path? Be a lamp unto thy feet for everyone, not just those who might be there. I'll tell you what I'm excited. When Michael and I are committed, and you can say more about continuing our dialogue, making dialogues more available at multiple levels in the faith community, in civic groups, government, et cetera. I just want to speak to something I'm committed to, because I think part of this is, what am I willing to do that's at risk to myself, or at maybe not about risk, but it puts me on the line a little bit. And I'm going to pick on my beloved home state of Idaho right here. We have a conversation going on in our schools right now where a number of people that look more like me are scared. They don't really understand a multicultural reality. They don't really understand what this may be. And there's a dialogue going on right now. Oh, you start to have social emotional learning in schools, right, which we all understand is so key to STEM or STEAM. But social emotional learning, that's a gateway to critical race theory. Next thing you know, it is a gateway to movement for Black lives. We could make fun of that, but I am exhausted personally by progressive arrogance. Jedi this, equity that, except when it relates to conservative folks. So here's where I want to dig, not to tell that anybody else ought to do a darn thing different, but I know I need to. Can I bring the same loving kindness and listening that I do into a Jedi conversation with my Black and brown friends and brothers and sisters and coworkers into a community with people who are scared about what's happening in the world, not sure about government control over the future of their kids, don't know what this whole thing means. And instead of bringing my arrogance, like, what's the matter with you? Why haven't you thought through this? Where's your faith life? To actually bring that same compassion to those who are concerned that social emotional learning is a gateway to something that they don't want. So right here in Idaho, as a beachhead, and Wellbeing Trust has got some other places we're working in the Providence footprint, we're going to make sure there's dialogue that's rooted in conversation. Like Reverend James Lawson taught the Freedom Riders 50 years ago, love one another as yourself. Let's actually love into those who are scared and unsure and are holding these voting rights restrictions in place, and listen and create some room for some actual understanding rooted in respect and dignity. And that's something that I'm very committed to do here. That may not be everybody's work, and some maybe go, what the heck is Norris off to? But I think that's a place where I want to be part of unlocking whiteness. And I'm excited about seeing business leaders and faith leaders and people of all stripes in Idaho coming together in a state that might be seen as a challenge for this kind of thing to actually be a place for transformation. And I'm committed to loving one another in that dialogue and showing up with respect for those where my edge might come up, where my prickliness might rise. That's an edge for me. Michael, love your thoughts.
Listening, Tyler, that's a beautiful and hard work.
Yeah.
Yet critical to be listening deeply and with heart and with grace. And Michael, your last thoughts about what are you going to move forward and do?
Yeah, I hold dear to a frame I learned with the Casey Foundation, the person, role, and system frame. And so, in my person, I'm going to continue to get better and grow and more conscious and to stop doing my own harm in the world. Yeah. I want to take that into my role, and I want to continue to help PolicyLink be a model of what equity looks like organizationally.
Yeah.
And I think there is work for us to do to help people understand what well-being looks like in the type of multiracial democracy we're talking about. Mm-hmm. The same way we can get parents to think about now looking at what quality childcare, as an example, looks like, or quality education. Imagine when they can see in our institutions what we're talking about, what it actually looks like, and demand it. That's what we've got to create next, because people don't know what this looks like. So we've got to create it. And the last thing I'll say is this: I want to help bring my voice to helping people understand, you don't have to fully understand something to stop the harm now. Right. And I want people to think about, how do we stop the harm and be on a journey to understand? Because that's what a lot of people of color are asking for. It's like, I'm all willing to be on a journey with you, but can you just stop hurting me right now so we can do that work? And so I want to continue to help people think about that, which is we can do both. We can be, and I say this for my own accountability. I don't have to get all the ways in which the LGBTQ community identifies, et cetera, to create a loving, safe space for them to work at PolicyLink.
Thank you.
Right? I don't have to get all of the gender issues totally right in my language right before I can treat women fairly and pay them fairly and make sure they're not discriminated or harassed at PolicyLink. There are things where we can be accountable and still not know, and we can stop the harm.
Yeah.
And so I want us to start championing this notion that if you want to accelerate understanding, let's stop the harm. You'd be surprised at how far things will just change if you just stop the damn harm.
So my takeaway, and I hope so many of you that are listening in, is exactly that message. Let's stop the harm, and let's all hold on to how do we envision a multicultural democracy,
Got it.
and how does those two processes move arm in arm, just like the conversation we've just had have been arm in arm, soul sharing, deeply relational. I'm really thankful to your time with us, and for those listening in, please reach out to our colleagues at each of their organizations if you choose. They would be interested in hearing your further thoughts about this space. And personal thank you to both of you. And I just want to say that next month we'll have a little bit of a change of pace because we're going to talk about the concept of toy pollution and how it disrupts the relational space and how we can think about that. And I have 3 people that'll join us from Thought Leadership in Auburn. That will continue interesting conversation about this relational health space. So, Michael, Tyler, again, bless you. Thank you for your vision, your leadership, your heart, your sharing, and we'll be all a part of envisioning the same things you're speaking of, the criticalness of stop the harm, and 2, we're moving, and we will be a multiracial democracy moving forward. So thanks so much.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Take care.
Bye-bye.